Welcome to 1189, an online Bible commentary. My name is Tyler Marston. Today we're taking a look at Genesis chapter 16. Right, so let's remember where we've been. We've had creation, God's good, perfect creation. He created man to rule and reflect his image back to creation, and man messed it up. They sinned, they chose death over God's wisdom, and as a result, evil just continued to spiral in the world until God sent the flood, and that was his way of kind of starting over, right? But it still didn't change the hearts of men. Men still rebelled. They built the Tower of Babel, right? And God says, okay, I'm going to go about this different this time. To bring restoration, I'm going to choose one man, one family, and I'm going to bless them and give them all these gifts and blessings. And through them, even though they don't always deserve it, through them I'm going to bring about restoration and deliverance for the entire human population, for the entire creation, through that family. And we saw that family that God chose was the family of Abram, right? Abram was not perfect. He's kind of a mixed bag, but he's promised him that through him all the families of the earth will be blessed, and he's going to be a huge nation with so many descendants. The problem is, right now, Abram doesn't have any descendants. He doesn't have a kid. And he's really old. And his wife, Sarai, is really old. And so at this point in time, Abram and Sarai are kind of going to be like, okay, what gives, God? They're starting to get impatient with God's promise. Genesis 16 is going to show us what happens when we take matters into our own hands, when we try to accomplish God's promises on our own terms, and the pain it causes ourselves and other people. So let's jump into it. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, and she had an Egyptian maid whose name was Hagar. So Sarai said to Abram, "Now behold, the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Please go into my maid. Perhaps I will obtain children through her." And Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. After Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Abram's wife Sarai took Hagar the Egyptian, her maid, and gave her to her husband Abram as his wife. So God had promised a son, but Sarai is impatient. And she sees this loophole. You know, it doesn't really make sense, but she's twisting whatever she can to get what she wants now. And Abram, it says, listens to her voice. Remember, that's just like the woman listening to the voice of the serpent, listening to those lies and deceptions. And so the logic goes, well, we've been waiting 10 years and God promised us a son, so, you know, if he hasn't done it in 10 years, surely this is what we're supposed to do, right? Is take matters into our own hands. And God says, no, that's not what you're supposed to do. And that doubt leads to sin. I mean, come on, giving up your maid as a sex slave to your husband, that's not good. That's not the Eden ideal for sure. And we're going to see it causes even more problems. He went into Hagar, and she conceived, and when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress Sarai was despised in her, Hagar's, sight. So as soon as their plan works, it gets messy, right? Who could have thought it, right? Hagar begins to taunt Sarai, and Sarai is definitely jealous of Hagar. And it's this classic moment of thinking you know what you want and wanting it, but when you get it, it's not at all what you really wanted, right? And that's because it was what you wanted. It's not what God wanted for you. So we always need to be careful of what we wish for, I guess. Sarai said to Abram, "May the wrong done me be upon you. I gave my maid into your arms, but when she saw that she had conceived, I was despised in her sight. May the Lord judge between you and me." So Sarai blames Abram, even though it was her idea. But I mean, Abram is also at fault for not saying, no, that's a terrible idea. We should trust God in this. And she even says, you know, may the Lord judge between me and you, right? It's not just ripping apart the relationship between Sarai and Hagar. It's ripping apart the relationship between Sarai and Abram. And that's the marriage union that God is planning to use and wants to use to bring about the redemption of all mankind. I mean, that's really the thing that blows my mind in all of these stories through Genesis is how many times people were one choice away from being completely unable to be used by God. I mean, think about all the times we've already seen Pharaoh, Abram try to give up Sarai to Pharaoh. If Pharaoh takes Sarai and doesn't give her back, there goes God's redemption plan, right? And in this moment, if Abram chooses to stay with Hagar instead of Sarai, there goes God's redemption plan, right? Abram said to Sarai, Behold, your maid is in your power. Do to her what is good in your sight. And Sarai treated her harshly, and she fled from her presence. So Abram is trying to diffuse the situation here, and he gives Sarai free rein to do whatever she wants to Hagar. And notice how he said, just do what's good in your sight. Remember, that kind of reminds us of the Garden of Eden again, and the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and how it looked good for fruit. It looked like it would give wisdom, but it was really poisonous, right? It was really deadly. And so Hagar ends up running away. She can't take it anymore, right? And man, I probably would too. Now the angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, by the spring on the way to Shur. So Hagar flees to the wilderness, and she finds this spring of water. Now this is a symbol of God's constant goodness, even in a dark, depressing, deadly situation. Characters in exile throughout the Bible, specifically in the wilderness, and they're having to make this choice. That's going to be a major theme throughout the rest of the Bible. I mean, think about the Exodus stories. Think about how that popped up in Jesus' own ministry. Think about David, right? And again, we've already seen it happen to Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel after they were exiled out of the garden. So Hagar is continuing in a theme that's going to be really big, and just that idea of being in the wilderness and seeking God, right, and having to make a choice. The angel of the Lord found Hagar in the wilderness by the spring, and he says to her, Hagar, Sarah's maid, where have you come from? Where are you going? And she said, I'm fleeing from the presence of my mistress Sarai. And the angel of the Lord said to her, return to your mistress and submit yourself to her authority. Now, verses like this kind of make us uncomfortable in this day and age in America in 2024, with all our history of slavery and everything. And slavery is a very bad, evil practice, and the Bible does not condone it. But this passage is still tricky, is still a little troubling. So let's kind of break it down and see why God is telling her to do this. So remember back in the Eden story, there was no slavery, right? All humans were ruling equally in the image of God. And the blessing of Eden paradise was flowing out all the way to all people, even to Israel's enemies, right? We saw that through the four rivers. So slavery is not the ideal. Slavery is not good. It's a concession, right? It's part of the evil that was added into the curse. In Hagar's specific case, God is commanding her to go back to the camp because he has a plan for her, and he has a plan for her son. And if she were to run off into the wilderness and die alone, that would be the end of those plans. Hagar being enslaved is a concession, right? And it's not the ideal. And it's a terrible concession. It's a really frustrating concession. But God is not abandoning her. And God has a plan for her and for her son. And it's ultimately a reminder of why we need a snake crusher, why we need someone to come and rescue us from the powers of sin and death, because sin and death is what created these institutions to begin with. So I just want to encourage you, if you're in an abusive situation, don't take these verses out of context and use them as an excuse to bear it or to stay in that abusive situation. Get help, find resources. There are tons of resources for all kinds of victims. And Hagar didn't have that. Hagar's only other choice was death, right? And that's why she went back to the protection of the camp. And it was ultimately for God's blessing for her and her son's life. So let's see what God has planned for Hagar. Moreover, the angel of the Lord said to her, I will greatly multiply your descendants so that they will be too many to count. The angel of the Lord said to her further, behold, you are with child, and you will bear a son, and you shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has given heed to your affliction. He will be a wild donkey of a man, and his hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand will be against him, and he will live to the east of his brothers. So Ishmael in Hebrew means God hears, and she names him that because God has heard her affliction. I mean, remember, she's not a perfectly innocent victim, but she's still a victim, right? She probably has had little to no say in this whole plot, which makes it really kind of abusive and sketchy. It doesn't give her the right to taunt Sarai afterwards and act like she did, but it also doesn't negate the situation she was put into. And it's a reminder that God always hears and pays attention to our afflictions. Then she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her. You are a God who sees. For she said, have I even remained alive here after seeing him? Therefore the well was called Beer Lahai Roi. Behold, it is between Kadesh and Bered. So God has said, I hear you, and she responds, I see you. And that God has seen her too, and she's even survived. She's withstood it. We serve a God who pays attention to our pain and our suffering, and he wants good things for us. So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram called the name of his son, whom Hagar bore, Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to him. Ishmael is born, and it's far from the end of their stories, of Abram's story, of Hagar's story, of Ishmael's story. And unfortunately, there's more suffering to come for this broken family, but it doesn't negate the good God that we serve, who wants good things for us and sees us and hears us in our times of pain and suffering. Let's take a look at all of our major characters in this chapter. Sarai is, in this story, is representative of doing what's right in your own eyes. She's self-focused and kind of inconsistent and is impatient. That sin and that selfishness causes pain for herself and for others around her. Abram in this story is representative of an apathetic approach to morality. He just permits Sarai to act and treat people however she wants, even when it's not best for him or his family or her. He should be leading and influencing Sarai to take care of Hagar and watch over her. And not to mention, he should have said no in the first place when Sarai gave her over to be his wife. I mean, hello. And Hagar is representative of God taking care of us, of seeing us and hearing us, providing for us when we've been hurt and abused. And that's regardless of whether or not we're an innocent victim, right? God sees and hears us no matter what we've done, where we're from, or who we are. That's Genesis chapter 16, and it's really an astounding story. And so we'll see where this whole twisted family tree is going next tomorrow. But thank you for watching 1189. My name's Tyler Marston. See you tomorrow. God bless.